Hey students, thanks for joining me on this lecture, this online lecture called Deep Change. And just so you know, the sun is finally broken out here, and dog Riley is just kind of wondering, when are we going outside? It's finally nice outside. Anyway, be with you in a little bit. Okay. She doesn't buy it. Shouldn't buy it at all. Hey, listen, I think it was Leo Tolstoy, maybe, who said, everybody thinks of changing humanity, nobody thinks of changing themselves. And as a licensed marriage and family therapist, as a credentialed mediator, as an educator, as a pastor, I've bumped into that a lot. And that is people really desiring to make a change out there, but the real change starts on the inside, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And quite frankly, what Jesus talked about all his earthly ministry is, it's about the heart. It's about what's going on in your heart. Now, that being said, one of my favorite writers a number of years ago said, we carry around two very basic needs: the need for security and the need for significance. All of us have that. The security part is the part that says, no matter what's going on in life, no matter how many times we've been fired, no matter how many relationships we've gone through or whatever, we need to know that we are loved by somebody. Now, those of us in the faith know we are forever loved by Jesus Christ. And I don't want to minimize that at all. I would not do that. It's a beautiful thing to know that even if people don't like you, there is somebody that does, and you are deeply loved. But those who write about this stuff say, but we also need somebody with skin on. We need somebody incarnate in our lives who love us just the way we are. But this writer also said we have security and we have significance. And significance is that part that says, when it's all said and done, we need to know that we have made a difference in somebody else's life. And quite frankly, that's so profound that it has led people to change careers, to change majors, to change a lot of things, just so they know when it's all said and done, I've made a difference in people's lives. So I'm going to walk you through some stuff that I've been processing mostly through some of the writings of Brian McLaren. But McLaren and others talk about the change processes, for a sustaining shalom. And it starts out with intrapersonal, meaning before we start looking at all the policy changes and before we start thinking about all the stuff that needs to change, we got to look at our own hearts. That's intrapersonal change. And then there is relational change, interpersonal. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And as a credentialed mediator who's gone into lots of systems that need to change, they need to change their vision. I've gone into a lot of systems where they change their structure. Now, there are times when policies and stuff like that do need to be changed. But we first of all have to look at the status, look at the measure of our heart, and then we have to look at what our relationships are like. So structural change. And then also just this reality, every one of us every one of us wants to make a difference out in the real world. We have that wired into us, that hope that we will make a systemic change or be instrumental in making a systemic change, whether it be the system be the church, or whether the system be where we work, which in my case is both. So we desire that. Now let me walk you through these, okay? The interpersonal change, that's the need to take ownership, to look inward before looking outward. Brian McLaren, in his book, The Great Spiritual Migration, says this internal personal conversion is essential to ensure that people's engagement is driven not merely by self-interest or momentary passion, but by a deep and abiding moral conviction. That's just a really good way of saying you start from the inside. You take ownership, you look inward before you look outward. If we don't, what often happens is in our attempts to effect change out there, we realize, wait a minute, this isn't working because sufficient change hasn't happened in the heart. In fact, you know, I've had the privilege of counseling lots of people down through the years. And when it comes to the matter of forgiveness or family reconciliation or whatever it might be, you know, there's always this desire to affect change out there. But I'll say, but what about you? Do you feel, do you believe that you have been changed, that you are forgiven? Because it's hard to give what you don't have. It's hard to forgive someone if you believe that you're still in God's penalty box, and that whatever you did back in the day, God is just holding you hostage for that. That's what I'm talking about, interpersonal change. Now, interesting. It's been my experience that this intrapersonal change happens through the spiritual disciplines of silence, contemplation, confession, and even worship. In other words, what we want to do, you guys, is put ourselves regularly in places where we can receive. Maybe that's in the discipline of silence. Maybe that's in the discipline of contemplation. Maybe it's been a long time since we've been involved in some confession. And here's how, in just a moment, I'll show you, here's how the psalmist framed it up. But also, it happens when you pay attention to the ways that you're wired, the sacred and the spiritual pathways, okay? In other words, let me frame it up this way. And my spiritual pathway is creation. That's why Riley's looking at me right now like, okay, pal, how soon are we going outside? Let's go. It's a beautiful day. When I know there's something that needs to change in my life, maybe my sense of humor has gotten an edge to it, maybe my anger is getting out of control, maybe I'm hurting people with my words, whatever it might be, I won't necessarily go read a book on anger. I'll go outside. I'll take myself skiing. I'll go for a long bike ride. I'll go rollerblading. I'll do something that puts me into creation, because I know enough of how I changed to know I better pay attention to my spiritual pathway, or as some writers call it, the sacred pathway. And this often happens, this intrapersonal change happens sometimes when we've been served up notice. In other words, when I was teaching at Bethel a number of years ago, I actually keeled over. I fainted, or I thought it was a faint, but it was actually my heart temporarily shutting down. And long story short, I'm the proud owner of a pacemaker. But as I talked to my cardiologist, and as we talked about, why this happened, and it's all electrical, by the way, it's the pacemaker helps it fire right, I guess is what I'm saying. But anyway, both of my cardiologists just locked eyes with me and said, "Okay, tell me about your stress level." And I said, "Well, I got this, I got that. Tell me about what you're doing to manage your weight. Tell me what you're like when people are angry with you. Tell me what you're like when you're angry with somebody else." I'm sitting here with two cardiologists just hammering me about heart stuff, literal heart stuff. But they're coming at it this side door saying, you got to look at all of life if there's going to be real interpersonal change. Okay. And this may seem like a shaming passage, you guys, but it's not. It's not a shaming passage at all. The psalmist, probably David, says, how can I know all the sins lurking in my heart? Cleanse me from these hidden faults. Keep your servant from deliberate sins. Don't let them control me. Then I will be free of guilt and innocent of great sin. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. I'm particularly caught with the second statement that the psalmist makes, cleanse me from these hidden faults. You guys, there are times that stuff is so out of our awareness and we're so busy doing stuff. And quite frankly, it's usually good stuff where we got to get this paper done and we got to get this taken, you got to go to work, got to watch the Twins game this afternoon, all of the things that are really, really important. But we wouldn't know about the things getting in our way unless we took some time for silence, contemplation, creation, something that will show us those hidden faults. Okay. So anyway, that's intrapersonal. Interpersonal is looking at the health of your relationships. Okay. Here's Tolstoy. Everybody thinks changing humanity, but no one thinks of changing himself. Here's where Stephen Covey has really helped me think through some of these. Stephen Covey has a sphere of concern and a sphere of influence. And he said, what often happens is we spend way too much time and energy on things we're concerned about, but really can't influence. So he recommends that you take some time to say, but if I devote significant energy to this cause, will I be able to influence change? Will I be able to impact change, or bring change about in this particular cause? Let me just give you an example, and this is just a recent example. All of us are concerned about the mass shootings. All of us are concerned about, and there was just one last night, mass shooting where 5 people were killed, including a 9-year-old boy. And we hear that and we read it every day and we wonder, what can I what can I do? Um, there's a lot we can do. We can, encourage our Congress people to do more than thoughts and prayers. We can lobby for issues of gun control and things like that. But the other day, the elders were, I'm a pastor of the church, came up with an idea. I can't remember the name, what this is called, but basically the church where I'm a pastor right now has decided to be kind of a rendezvous point. Okay. If there's a shooting in the schools around Knox Church, we are communicating and have communicated to those schools that if you need a safe place to go, to gather, bring the kids, bring the staff, bring the teachers over to Knox Presbyterian Church. See, that we can influence that. We all have concerns about it. Every one of us have concerns about that. But what change can we effect? Well, that's one thing we can do. And then also, you will see over and over again, you guys, in the scripture, that if you have these 2 or 3 people in your life who have earned the right to inform you, have earned the right to at times challenge you, comfort you, when that community starts to break down, you need to spend significant time repairing that. In fact, I'll stop right there just for a second. Maybe one of the reasons that change isn't happening, the deeper change isn't happening in your life right now, is because you've lost, or your intimate community, so to speak, has been damaged. Maybe something was said, maybe something was done, and it's taken some courage to get over and to frame up that email or frame up that text saying, hey, can we meet over at Caribou? I just need to have a conversation. I want to repair this. And then also, this is particularly appropriate for those of you going into the people helping professions like social work, therapy, those kinds of things. Because you are around a lot of unhealth in any given day, you have to have healthy community around you. It's called compassion fatigue. Okay, it is particularly experienced by doctors. It's experienced by social workers big time. It's experienced by pastors. It's experienced by therapists. It's called compassion fatigue, where you are always spending so much. Riley, I'll be with you in a little bit. Okay, just wait. You're spending so much time and energy and heart out there with people who are literally sick, doctors and such, or emotionally just draining, and it doesn't seem to be getting better. And the change that you do effect with these folks doesn't seem to make a dime's bit of difference when it's all done. So you need to be in the presence of people who are healthy. You just do. All right, I'll leave it at that. And I preached on this passage not too long ago, and I've come back to it so many times, because we are a generation that's busy. We are pretty proud of how calendar, our calendar is filled with this, with that. So we forget that Jesus in Matthew chapter 9 basically says, I want you to go and learn the meaning of this scripture. I want you to show mercy, not just offer sacrifices. In other words, it's his way of saying, I don't really care how busy you are. I want you to be involved in the ministry of mercy. I want you to show mercy, not put one more thing on your calendar that shows me how busy you are, and even busy for Jesus, okay? And then Jesus again in Matthew chapter 5 says, so if you're presenting a sacrifice at the altar in the temple and you suddenly realize somebody has something against you, drop your sacrifice right there. Forget about that sacrifice. Go and be reconciled to that person. Then come and offer your sacrifice to God. Now, sometimes there are policies that need to be changed. I was interim pastor of a church one time that they just lacked a vision. They were right in the heart of a city where there were just all kinds of needs around them, but they didn't know how to reach out. They had gotten very inward, and they had all this money, and they decided to add a wing to the building. And I said, why are you doing that? First of all, you don't have enough people to sustain or to justify having another building on your site. But second of all the needs around you. But no, they wanted to change the literal structure. And again, you got to make sure, and I'm talking to you, but you got to make sure before you start to tackle either systemic or structural change that interpersonal change are foundational. You really need to pay attention to what's going on in your relationships and what's going on in your heart. Now, it is the default. People will change policies, they'll change office hours, they'll change all kinds of things that they think needs to be changed because they don't have a vision. They don't have a heart for what's going on out there. So they'll add new wings to buildings, they'll tighten up policies, they'll do that kind of thing. Now, in my world, not only at Bethel University, but as a marriage and family therapist, I see a lot of folks, a lot of organizations will start to focus in on sexuality, or as Brian McLaren calls it, fundasexuality, and that is taking a stand or excessive attention, I'm sorry, to policies. We need to make sure this and that. I wish I could say more about that, and I've actually gotten in trouble for saying more about this, but it's just interesting how when you have a world out there that's just longing for mercy and for grace, that organizations will tighten down the rules about either sexuality or whatever it might be. And again, I'll just kind of leave it at that. And there's room, you guys, for structural change. In Acts chapter 6, it's interesting, but as the believers rapidly multiplied, this is early church now, but as the believers rapidly multiplied, there were rumblings of discontent. The Greek-speaking believers complained about the Hebrew-speaking believers, saying that their widows were being discriminated against in the daily distribution of food. So the 12, the disciples, called a meeting of all the believers. They said, hey, we apostles, and they didn't say, hey, I just inserted that into the text. We apostles should spend our time teaching the word of God, not running a food program. That may seem like arrogance, but it's really not. It's not arrogance. They're just saying we're called to this. There are other people that can do that. And so, brothers, it was kind of a patriarchal, male-dominated world. Select 7 men who are well respected and are full of the spirit of wisdom. We will give them this responsibility. Then we apostles can spend our time in prayer and teaching the word. Here's where it gets good. This is what we all sign up for, is to make a lasting change in systems. But it'll only happen when the leaders of the system are emotionally mature. In other words, you might be in a work environment right now. You might be in a church environment where there's definitely change that is necessary. But the people who trained me in mediation and the people who trained me in therapy repeatedly said, if the leaders don't get it, you're screwed. In other words, it's really hard to effect change in a system when the leaders in that system are not emotionally mature. And I'm purposely saying emotionally mature because a lot of times when we talk about maturity in leadership, we talk about how much that leader gets done, or how many Bible verses that leader knows, or whatever it might be. But we're now looking at what's the emotional IQ of that person. How do they respond when they're disappointed? How do their teenage children talk about them? You know, all these things that are worth looking at. Now, undifferentiated leaders, leaders who are not emotionally mature, often focus on the growth of the organization. And I've been a part of some of those organizations where this is growing like crazy. And because of my commitment to systemic change, I've often said, can we dial it back? I know you got lots of people here, but how healthy are we? I mean, do we talk openly with one another? Do we talk to each other, or do we talk about each other? Or what's the work-life balance in this organization? Is it okay to take some time off to address some emotional needs in our lives? These are all questions that, as I've had a chance to intervene in these systems, that I ask. Okay. Again, sphere of concern and sphere of influence, and interpersonal change, intra and interpersonal change are just foundational to this. You got to go after the heart. You got to go after your healthy relationships. And I like how Eugene Peterson puts it. He says it's a long obedience in the same direction. You just keep one foot in front of the other. When you're not seeing the systemic change that you want or that is necessary, you just keep plodding away and doing what you need to do. And McLaren puts a good warning out there, and I've personally experienced this. Those who join the great work for deep change almost always face great suffering, and you can almost certainly drop the almost, which is, it's just a reality check, you guys. It's just a reality check of, if you are being called to effect change in a system, don't expect that you're going to get applauded for that. You can pretty much expect that you'll be marginalized for that. Even if they hired you to effect change in this organization, the minute you start to do even some cosmetic changes, you're the bad guy. It was better before Rota got here. I want to go back to the way it was before. That's quite frankly the way it works. So if there is a life verse, this is it for me. And actually it was intended to be everybody's life verse, but I call Micah 6:8 my voting guide. When students or anybody else asks me, how'd you vote? Because they always want to know. Well, I'll actually tell them, but I'll tell them, actually my voting guide is Micah 6:8. I'll read the other voting guides about how the person feels about, issues of racism, stuff like that. But I'll put that candidate up against Micah 6:8 and say, are they humble? Do they show mercy to the marginalized? Or do they just continue to make it us and them? Us, we're the good guys, them, whether they're people at the border or wherever they might be, they're the bad guys. But justice, you guys, you cannot escape and will not escape this fundamental reality that justice and mercy are themes all the way through the Bible. Old Testament, New Testament, take your pick. You're going to see justice and mercy all over the place. So how do we know? First of all, it's when justice, mercy, and humility drive our decision making. It's also, I always challenge my students, particularly in classes where I teach about family, that you've all inherited something. It scares the daylights out of me to read portions of, I believe, the book of Exodus, perhaps Leviticus, where the sins of the generations are passed to the third and fourth generation. We've all inherited something, y'all. We've all taken on the sins of previous generations, and we need to know what those are. We need to stand against them. We need to wrestle through them. We need to pray through them. All that. When you're moving more and more towards shalom or wholeness, when you won't settle for symptomatic relief. It's interesting. As I'm recording this, well, right before I recorded this, I had a visit with my doctor, and I'm facing some interesting medical things right now. And he says to me, we can go after what will help you alleviate the symptoms, or we can go after something that will really address whatever you're facing. And I was tempted. I'm thinking, gosh, it'd be nice to be free from these symptoms for a little bit. He says, but no, if we go the systemic change route, it's going to be a while before those symptoms disappear. So I'm going that route, not because I'm making this online lecture today, but I'm just going to go the route that says, yeah, it'd be nice to be rid of these symptoms, but I want to go after deeper change. And then when reconciliation and repair are happening, and then when you are willing to address, let me go back. When you're willing to address the chronic anxiety, not just the acute anxiety, which means, as you perhaps have heard either in class or in other venues, there's chronic anxiety, which has been there for years, but nobody will address it. The acute anxiety is, Houston, we got a problem, let's deal with it. And you do deal with it. But chronic anxiety, the stuff one writer calls unfinished business, that the real change starts to happen. And quite frankly, the real angst starts to happen when you address the chronic anxiety. Okay? I've learned a lot in the last few years about lament and joy. The joy of having 3 grandchildren, the joy of seeing our 2 children find partners that love them unconditionally. There's so much joy attached to that. The joy of growing older with Judy, my wife of 41 years. But there's been lament, saying goodbye to my brother, saying goodbye to my mom, saying goodbye to portions of my faith that I've deconstructed and said, I don't really want, I don't want any part of that anymore. So there's a balance between lament and joy. And I think you probably know what I'm experiencing or what I'm talking about, because undoubtedly you've experienced it. Now, people ask me, well, when will I know that there's shalom going on, wholeness going on in my life? It's when you're less egocentric and more other-centered, which is what the scriptures and Jesus himself has said all along. He says, if you want to find your life, you actually lose your life. Interesting paradox. We don't talk about that enough, but basically he's saying, if it's all about you, you're not going to find real life. But if it's about others, you are. More village, less individual. And we've talked about this, more ambiguity. You would think that your professor would say, you got to be darn certain about this and that. I'm finding that curiosity and doubt and ambiguity is actually helping me grow stronger and deeper. And it's, quite frankly, it's a wonderful thing to not have all the answers. It just is. Less entitlement, less privilege, and more contentment. There's more serenity, meaning, maybe you're sleeping better. You're finding that your life is less chaotic. And I know these are crazy times for all of us. I get that. But if this deeper change really starts to happen, you'll find the increased ability to say no, the increased ability to disappoint people. And for you recovering people pleasers, that's going to be a real stretch. That's a near-death experience for some of you, to let others down. But if you can sense that saying yes to this or making this person happy, who's criticizing you or angry with you or whatever, you will find that the more you press into the willingness to live in the tension of that relationship, that it'll become easier and easier. Not to disappoint, but it'll become easier and easier for you to have more serenity in your life. More us, less them, more harmony, and less division. All right. Hey, listen, that's what I got. And I've been thinking a lot about deep change as I'm closer and closer to retiring from a couple of different professions. I'm going to continue to do a couple things, but I'm going to let go of a couple things. But, at this point in life, and at your point in life, we all kind of wonder, am I making a difference? Am I secure in the love of Jesus Christ? Am I secure in the love of someone else who unconditionally cares for me? And am I making a difference? So there you go. Thanks, you guys.